So we've got 3 rounds. The first round is the nature of programming. The second round is declarative or imperative. And the third round is going to be the complexity of HTML combined with some CSS versus JavaScript. Probably the most basic thing that you can have in any programming language is the use of the if statement. If a certain condition is true, then we'll execute a line of code or a section of code, else do something else. Those if lines of code are written within the code of the program. Loading an image in HTML is almost as straightforward as styling some paragraph text. And although loading an image in, say, C++ is much more difficult, look at some of the stuff we can do with it, such as stretching the image, as you can see here. You've got total control of how the image gets rendered on the screen. Now this second section of round 1 is far more interesting when we start to look at loops. What can loops do? If I want 3 paragraphs of text on the screen in HTML, then I write 3 paragraphs. If I want 3 lines of text on the screen with something like C++, then I write the situation within the code in the way of a for loop. But we can do something with C++ that we can't do in HTML directly. We can make it carry on indefinitely using a while loop. A while loop is something that we can't in any way resemble directly within HTML alone. We would need to use JavaScript. Displaying text in C++ is even more difficult than loading an image, but we can do all sorts of fancy 3D stuff, like animating this timer and setting the colour in accordance with the screen depth values. How does HTML compare on its own to a so-called programming language when it comes to variables, function calls and object-oriented programming? Not orientated as it says on screen, that's obviously a stupid typo. If we just think of a variable as a name that can be assigned a value, then we can make the argument that the attributes within HTML are basically variables. Therefore, let's compare attributes in HTML with C++. In HTML, we can say width equals 75. In C++, we've got int width equals 75. Style equals colour blue in HTML. C++ assisted by the OpenGL API, we've got GL clear colour, red, green, blue, alpha. If we want to load an external file, in HTML we've got source equals rockmusic.mp3, and in C++ it's just a constant char pointer equals the same string. We can call a function directly from within HTML and we can compare that with C++, but the function itself exists as part of JavaScript. The final part of round 1 is to look at mathematics. So there's no mathematics going on with HTML. HTML has a maths tag, but that isn't for the purposes of carrying out mathematical calculations or doing sums or anything like that. It's just for displaying and formatting numeracy and mathematical notation, whereas with JavaScript we can do all the kinds of sums that we can with any other programming language. If you Google is HTML declarative versus imperative, the first thing that comes up on the top of page 1, HTML is a declarative language, and all of the instructions you provide when you use HTML follow that paradigm. But when we go a little bit further down the page, we've got is HTML declarative or imperative, or neither? Why? The answer given, HTML is a markup language, so neither declarative or imperative. But what's the difference between them anyway? This guy says it's nothing more than a layer of abstraction. And this guy seems to confirm that by pointing out that all programs are going to have an amount of imperative and declarative code. So let's now search for, is HTML a programming language? HTML is perhaps one of the easiest front-end programming languages to master, so it seems we can consider HTML to be an extremely declarative form of programming. JavaScript will likely take longer to grasp than CSS. What does that even mean? Is JavaScript easier to learn than HTML and CSS? It isn't as straightforward, as HTML and CSS are simpler and easier to understand than JavaScript. You've got to put the situation into context. I decided to go onto Stack Overflow just to see if I could find something that was challenging. So this guy's trying to make this particular grid pattern. Personally, I would find this quite difficult. The result's not what he was expecting. Now this guy's come up with a solution, but look at the complexity involved, it's not exactly simple. So if someone wants to argue that JavaScript is always going to be more complicated and more difficult to learn than HTML and CSS, I say absolutely no. It has to be put into context and you have to look at the particular examples involved. Also on Stack Overflow, I decided to search for some relatively simple JavaScript examples. We've got this example. It involves setting a variable and a function call and displaying the value in the console. He was expecting the answer to be 4, but just look at how simple this example is in JavaScript compared to the example that we just looked at with the HTML and the CSS. This is far easier to understand, at least for me anyway. Anyway, the problem turns out to be that he was just using a keyword rather than using his own variable name. So I've just simply taken that guy's code, changed it as suggested, and here's the result.